She carries 6 grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs rather than make 2 trips. Her arms burn. The plastic cuts into her palms. But asking for help? That thought doesn't even form. It's not stubbornness, not exactly. It's something deeper, something that was written into her nervous system long before she had words for it. Watch her at work. She stays late fixing problems that aren't hers to fix. When colleagues offer assistance, she smiles and says, "I've got it." And she does. She always does. That's the point. That's the proof. Every task completed alone is evidence that she doesn't need what failed her before, other people. This is hyper-independence, not the healthy self-reliance we admire in capable adults, but something else entirely. It's independence weaponized against connection. It's sufficiency turned into a fortress. And behind those walls lives someone who learned, probably very young, that needing others is dangerous. The hyper-independent adult looks successful from the outside, strong, capable, the one everyone else leans on. But if you look closer, if you really pay attention, you'll see the exhaustion they'll never admit to. The loneliness they've convinced themselves is just being introverted. The weight of carrying everything alone that they wear like armor they can't take off. How does a child learn to need no one? Sometimes it begins with disappointment. A parent who promised to show up but didn't. Help that was asked for but never came. Tears that were met with irritation instead of comfort. The child's nervous system takes notes. Needing equals abandonment. Vulnerability equals danger. Other times, it's more complex. Maybe the parents were overwhelmed, struggling with their own wounds. Maybe they praised the child for being so mature, so capable, never realizing they were teaching that child that love was earned through not needing. "You're so easy," they'd say, relieved. "You never ask for anything." And the child heard, "My needs are burdens. My independence is my value." John Bowlby, who gave us attachment theory, understood this. When a child's bids for connection are consistently unmet or met with inconsistency, they adapt. They develop what he called avoidant attachment. They learn to self-soothe, self-regulate, self-everything. Not because they don't need connection, but because needing it and not getting it hurts too much. We live in a culture that worships self-sufficiency. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you want something done right, do it yourself. The hyper-independent person receives constant validation for the very behavior that's slowly destroying them from the inside. They're promoted at work, praised for their reliability, called inspirational for never complaining. No one sees the 3 a.m. panic attacks. No one notices they eat lunch alone, not by choice, but because they don't know how to accept an invitation without feeling like they're imposing. No one realizes that their "I'm fine" is less a statement and more a prayer, a desperate hope that if they say it enough times, it might become true. Think about it. The hyper-independent person has mastered the art of appearing to need nothing. They've learned to preemptively meet their own needs before anyone notices they have them. They buy themselves flowers. They celebrate their achievements alone. They Google their symptoms instead of calling a friend. They move apartments without asking anyone to help carry boxes. And each time they succeed at not needing, they think they're winning. But what they're really doing is confirming an old wound's logic. You can only count on yourself. The neuroscience tells us something fascinating. When we successfully complete tasks alone, our brains release dopamine. We feel accomplished. But when we ask for help and receive it, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The hyper-independent person has trained their brain to choose accomplishment over connection, dopamine over oxytocin, because one feels safe and the other feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. Studies in developmental psychology show that children who develop hyper-independence often score high in competence, but struggle with emotional regulation in relationships. They know how to do everything except be vulnerable. They can solve complex problems, but can't say, "I'm struggling." They can carry the weight of the world, but can't share it. And relationships? This is where the cost becomes devastatingly clear. The hyper-independent person often attracts partners who are either equally avoidant, creating relationships that look functional but feel empty, or they attract people who need to be needed, creating an exhausting dynamic where one person does all the emotional heavy lifting while the hyper-independent person watches from behind their walls, wanting to let them in, but not knowing how. They say things like, "I love you, but I don't need you," thinking it's romantic, not realizing that love without need is like a plant without roots. Pretty to look at, but ultimately unsustainable. When they do try to open up, it feels unnatural, forced, like speaking a foreign language they learned from a textbook but never heard spoken aloud. They might share a problem, then immediately follow it with, "But I'm handling it." They ask for help, then do the task themselves before anyone can respond. They reach out, then pull back, then wonder why connection feels so impossible. Here's what the hyper-independent person doesn't realize. Their independence isn't protecting them, it's isolating them. It's not making them strong, it's making them brittle. Because true strength, real resilience, comes not from needing no one, but from knowing how to need wisely. There's another layer here, something we rarely talk about. Hyper-independence can become addictive. Each time the hyper-independent person succeeds alone, they get a hit of validation. "See, I don't need anyone." It becomes a source of identity, even pride. The breaking point varies. Sometimes it's illness, sudden, undeniable, forcing them to need help whether they want it or not. Sometimes it's loss, the death of someone they secretly depended on more than they admitted. Sometimes it's just exhaustion, the slow, grinding realization that they cannot sustain this anymore. But here's the thing about breaking points. They're not just endings, they're invitations. Invitations to finally question the old programming, to ask, what if needing others isn't weakness? What if it's the most human thing there is? healing hyper-independence doesn't mean becoming dependent. It means learning the dance of interdependence. It means understanding that needing others is not the same as being needy, that vulnerability is not the same as weakness, that asking for help is not the same as being helpless. It starts small, laughably small. Asking someone to hold the door, accepting a compliment without deflecting, letting someone else pick the restaurant. These might seem like nothing, but to the hyper-independent person, they're revolutionary acts. They're declaring, I don't have to control everything. I don't have to be everything. Therapy helps. Specifically, relational therapy that focuses not just on talking about connection, but practicing it. The therapist becomes a safe person to need, to depend on, to trust will show up consistently. It's like physical therapy for the attachment system. Slowly, carefully, stretching muscles that have been clenched for decades. Let's be honest, it's scarifying. For someone who has built their entire identity around needing no one, learning to need feels like death. And in a way it is. It's the death of the false self that was created to survive. But what emerges from that death is something more authentic, more whole, more human. Here's what the hyper-independent person needs to understand. The people who truly love you don't love you for your independence. They love you for you. Your worth is not in what you can do alone, but in who you are in connection. Your strength is not in your ability to need no one, but in your ability to discern who is safe to need. Because here's the deeper truth that hyper-independence hides. We all need each other. Not in a desperate, anxious way, but in a fundamental, biological, spiritual way. We need witnesses to our lives. We need co-regulation for our nervous systems. We need others to mirror back our worth when we can't see it ourselves. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about the I-thou relationship, the sacred space between two people where both are fully themselves yet fully connected. Moving from I-it to I-thou requires the one thing hyper-independence was designed to avoid: risk. The risk of disappointment, the risk of abandonment, the risk of being seen as human with needs, limitations, and longings. But what if the real risk is continuing to live behind walls? What if the real danger is not in needing others, but in the slow erosion of self that comes from chronic isolation? What if the thing you're protecting yourself from, being hurt by others, is less painful than what you're doing to yourself by staying separate? The adult who needs no one is usually the child who needed someone and learned it was safer to stop trying. But that child, that tender, hoping part, is still there, still waiting, still capable of connection if given the chance. So, how do you begin? You begin by grieving. Grieving the child who had to become so strong, so young. Grieving the years spent alone when you didn't have to be. Grieving the connections that could have been if you'd known how to let people in. You find safe people, not perfect people, but consistent ones. people who show up not because you've earned it through your independence, but because they care. And when your nervous system screams that this is dangerous, you breathe. You stay. You let yourself be seen. You learn the difference between independence and hyper-independence. Independence says, I can take care of myself, and I can ask for help when I need it. Hyper-independence says, I must take care of myself because no one else will. One comes from confidence, the other from wound. And here's what might surprise you. As you learn to need others, you become more capable, not less, because energy you used to spend maintaining walls can go toward creation. Because problems shared really are problems halved. Because two minds, two hearts, two sets of hands can build something neither could alone. The paradox is beautiful. In learning to need others, you need them less desperately. In allowing support, you become genuinely stronger. The adult who needs no one is exhausted from carrying the world. But imagine, just imagine, what it would feel like to put some of that weight down, to let someone else hold part of it, to discover that sharing the load doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Because at the end of the day, the person who needs no one doesn't actually exist. The real person underneath, the one who learned so young to hide their needs, that person deserves to finally rest, to finally reach out, to finally discover that the world is full of hands waiting to meet theirs. Not because they've earned it through their independence, but because connection is their birthright. Just like it's yours,